2011. He's currently working on a 2-volume introduction to Indian philosophy, including a textbook and a reader of primary sources. He's taught at the International Summer School of Jain Studies in New Delhi, India, lectured at the Siddhartharam Jain Turf in Blairstown, New Jersey, and in April 2013 he delivered the inaugural Vershan Gandhi lecture in Jain Studies at Claremont School of Theology. Of course, we're delighted to have you here and we welcome you. I'm just thinking about this microphone at the moment. Is it kind of working and then not working? Or is it okay? You fixed it. Okay, all right. Well, we'll hear you. And the other microphone that you see there is for after the lecture. There'll be a time for the question and answer period that is always such a great part of these events. If you do have a question after the lecture, please go to that microphone there so we can hear one another. And Dr. Long will handle that part of the evening. So, again, welcome, and we look forward to your lecture.
Thank you very much for that kind welcome. Can everyone hear me reasonably well now? A little bit? Oh, okay. I'll try to speak loudly, all right, so everyone can hear. But if there is a problem, if you can't hear me, just shout out and we'll see what we can do about it. I would like to also thank Raj Jain, Dr. Sushil Jain, Christine Jain for their very kind welcome of me here. I was very moved when Raj told me today about the origins of this lecture series, coming out of tragedy. And in fact, it was something I could relate to because my own journey into the study of Indian traditions began with the death of my father when I was 12 years old. And it's very often these tragedies that make us really think about what life is all about and makes us dig into the deeper questions. And we try to turn these things into something positive. So I'm very grateful to be able to play some small part in that today. So the topic I've chosen this evening, something I've been working on for some time, is how Jain philosophy can address a lot of the conflict that we experience in our world today. We often ask ourselves, why is there so much conflict, so much violence in our world, especially in the name of religion? Every one of the major world religions includes somewhere within its texts some variation of what Christians call the Golden Rule, the principle that we should all treat others as we wish to be treated. Yet it is the rare religious tradition that has never at any time in history been used as a justification for violence against those who are regarded as other, the heretic, the heathen, or the infidel. Some would argue that all of this irrational violence which goes against the central ethical insights of the traditions in the name of which it is committed, is a very good reason to reject religion altogether. That adherence to beliefs which are incapable of scientific verification does not belong in a society that wishes to regard itself as advanced or enlightened. The irrationality of religiously motivated violence is traced, according to this line of argument, to the irrationality of religion itself. If this root cause of violence could be eradicated, so the argument goes, violence itself would subside, and we could all share a more peaceful and habitable world. In the words of one of my favorite musical artists, John Lennon, imagine no religion. On the other hand, one of the lessons of the 20th century should certainly be that ideologies rooted in the rejection of religion are no less capable of inhumanity and of violence on a massive scale than our religious ideologies. Indeed, when coupled with the capabilities of modern technology, the violence undertaken in the name of ideologies such as communism and Nazism has in fact taken far more life than pre-modern history's witch hunts, crusades, and inquisitions. Think of the Holocaust, or the killing fields of Cambodia, where this picture is drawn from. 1/4 of the population of Cambodia was destroyed in a frenzy of mass murder carried out in the name of an anti-religious political ideology. The evidence, therefore, would suggest that it is not religion specifically that is at the root of violence. Any ideological difference, any difference of worldview, can be marshaled in defense of the notion that we ought to kill one another. Again, we are faced with the irrationality of this situation. For like the religions of the world, some of the non-religious, secular ideologies that have served as rallying cries for slaughter are, like the world's religions, rooted in humane ethical visions. Marxism is not rooted in a desire to foment violence, but to ensure that resources are distributed in an equitable fashion. Certainly a noble end, with which many religious persons would agree. In fact, the Dalai Lama agreed with Mao Zedong before he realized what Mao had in mind for Tibet. If it is not the religious or non-religious character of a worldview that renders it a possible justification for violence, there must be something additional, something that is projected onto a worldview that distorts it and turns it into something it was not originally intended to be. The modern Hindu sage, Swami Vivekananda, pictured here, claims that the source of interreligious violence, and we could add violence across worldviews more generally, is not the worldviews themselves, but rather a set of attitudes that become entwined with them. He defines these as sectarianism, bigotry, and fanaticism. Broadly, these can be defined, respectively, as the tendency to fragment a community because of differences in views, rather than seeking coexistence, that's sectarianism. A tendency to dislike others because of their worldview, ethnic or national origin, gender, or sexual orientation. We call this bigotry. And a way of adhering to one's own worldview that precludes any appreciation for other views. This would be fanaticism. And Swami Vivekananda is in fact very eloquent about these three phenomena. Sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant, fanaticism, have long possessed this beautiful earth. This is from his first address to the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago in 1893. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization, and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is now. In fact, this last part of what Swami Vivekananda says, how we'd be more advanced had there not been so much bigotry, reminds me of a quote from another favorite thinker of mine, Carl Sagan, when talking about the destruction of the great library of Alexandria by a religious mob hundreds of years ago. He says, if that library had not been destroyed, we might be traveling to the stars now. But so much knowledge was lost because of the fanaticism of that time. The danger, the seductive power of these destructive tendencies lies in the fact that when one succumbs to them, when one gives in to sectarianism, bigotry, and fanaticism, one feels that one is in fact behaving righteously, that one is being faithful to the values that one's tradition upholds. The tragedy is that in so doing, one is betraying those very values by embarking upon a slippery slope that may lead to hating and killing one's neighbor in the name of a tradition that teaches one to love one's neighbor as oneself. To take just one example. Why, again and again, did the mic just go? Okay, I think I can move it. Why, again and again, do we succumb to these tendencies, these Papa sanskars, or evil habits, as they're called in the Sanskrit language of the spiritual and philosophical traditions of India? The thread that underlies this unholy trinity of sectarianism, bigotry, and fanaticism, it seems, is fear. Fear that the other will undermine our precious values, or that the other will take resources from our community, or that the other is in fact evil and means to do us harm. I was hoping to inject a little humor here with this photograph, this illustration of fear. According to the traditions of India, this fear is itself rooted in a deeper ignorance, which is really the root of all the evil in the world. One might ask, ignorance of what? The answer is ignorance of our true spiritual nature and the ways in which this nature binds us to all beings. We are all ultimately one. Each of the Indian traditions has its own way of expressing this unity. In the Hindu philosophy of Vedanta, the term for this basic unity is Brahman, the infinite existence, consciousness, and bliss, Anantaram Satchit Anandam, that forms the essential nature of all beings, and that manifests in each of us as our Atman, our fundamental self. The Buddhist tradition speaks of interdependent origination, or interbeing, Praticca Samuppada, the fundamental interconnectedness of all beings. And the Jain tradition speaks of the universal reality of the jiva, the life force or soul, which is the essential nature not only of all living beings as these are conventionally understood, but that also dwells in creatures that inhabit the air, the water, earth, and fire. Our violence against the other is made possible by our seeing the other as wholly other, as so other that we are blinded to the many ways in which we are the same. As the Western philosopher Spinoza observed, our love for others tends to diminish to the degree that they are different from us. At one extreme end, there is the psychopath who has no regard for the well-being of anyone other than himself. Fortunately, such persons tend to be quite rare. But it is all too easy for many of us to withhold our love from those whom we do not know, people outside of our immediate community of daily interaction. It is even easier for us to withhold our love from people who hold a different worldview, who speak a different language, or who have a different physical appearance from ourselves. And it is even easier yet to withhold our love from living beings that are non-human, and thus to inflict violence that we would never consider inflicting on our fellow human beings, including consuming them as food. In fact, the ease with which we inflict violence upon non-human life is a kind of template or foundation for our violence against one another. For our violence against our fellow human beings is facilitated if we can regard them as non-human, as animals. It is not uncommon to hear human enemies in a conflict described as animals. And I recall my father, a Vietnam War veteran, describing how in his military training he was discouraged from thinking or speaking about the Vietnamese people as human beings. American soldiers were instead conditioned to refer to the Vietnamese people only with derogatory ethnic slurs, I won't repeat them here, that were meant to render them less than fully human in the soldiers' minds. In the act of otherizing the other, that is, of attending only to the ways in which the other is unlike ourselves, and of projecting onto the other only those traits that we do not wish to see in ourselves, we commit, one could say, the original violent act. On the basis of this otherization, this literal alienation, progressively greater violence becomes possible. One could say that from bigoted and hateful thoughts flow bigoted and hateful words, and similarly, from bigoted and hateful words flow bigoted and hateful deeds. At the same time, valuing otherness negatively and focusing only upon the ways in which the other is like us can also constitute a kind of violence. An example of this is the fallacy of what in the US is called colorblindness, in which we assert that we will simply treat everyone the same, perhaps the same as we wish to be treated ourselves. This sounds deceptively like the golden rule, except that by failing to attend to the ways in which others are in fact different from ourselves, culturally for example, we may end up treating them poorly. It is necessary to deepen our understanding of the golden rule, to mean not only treating others as we wish to be treated, but treating others as we would wish to be treated under the same circumstances, with the same background of history and cultural assumptions. Now, a quick question about this photograph. Do you all watch Stephen Colbert up here? Okay, so this is Stephen Colbert and his black friend, who is never given a name. And this picture would often be utilized by Stephen Colbert. For those of you who aren't familiar with him, he's a very satirical comedian. And he plays, in his old show, he played this really clueless guy. And he would insist, I do not see color. I do not see difference in people. And to prove how open-minded he was, he would always show this picture with his black friend, who looks extremely uncomfortable and like he doesn't want to be there. And Stephen would say, I don't see color. He would say, I know that I'm white because I have my own TV show, and things like that. But this is really just to sort of illustrate this idea of colorblindness, where people think they're being very open-minded, but in fact there's a kind of a shutting out of anything that's truly different in the other person. So we should treat each other not simply as we wish to be treated, but as we would wish to be treated if we were the other person. Now, discerning what this means, what it is to be like someone else, of course requires us to get to know the other person, to learn about them, and in short, to practice empathy. And cultivating empathy is a process. One could say it's a way of life. So how can Jainism promote empathy across religious and cultural boundaries? This brings me to the central thesis of my presentation today, namely that the Jain philosophy of infinite diversity, Anekantavada, or Anekantva in Hindi, can be of great assistance in cultivating a way of life rooted in empathy and nonviolence, and recognition of the common, fundamentally spiritual nature of every being we encounter, as well as an appreciation of each being's distinctive uniqueness, so you have similarity and difference. One can incorporate the spirit of this philosophy into one's life without necessarily adopting the Jain way of life in its entirety, though it certainly does invite one to explore the rich and profound tradition and the wise and ancient community in which it emerged. My own studies of Jainism, which finally led me to writing a textbook about this tradition, began with my deep appreciation and fascination with this particular philosophy, which I perceive to have great possibilities to enhance and deepen the concept of religious pluralism, which I'll say more about in a little bit. So, what is the Jain philosophy of infinite diversity, and how can it help us to follow the middle path between seeing the other as wholly other, thus allowing the other to be an object of our potential violence, and appreciating the other only in as much as the other is like us, thus allowing us to resist learning from difference and expanding our own view of reality? How can Jain philosophy help us to live more peacefully with others who are different from us, yet share a common humanity and a common spiritual nature shared by all living beings? To understand the Jain philosophy of infinite diversity, or as I've also called it, the Jain philosophy of relativity, it is necessary first to understand some basic facts about the Jain tradition itself, as well as the broader Indian cultural milieu in which it developed and in which it has thrived for thousands of years. The Jain tradition itself is truly ancient. According to Jain teaching, what we now call Jainism or Jain Dharma is as old as the universe itself, describing the nature of reality throughout all of cosmic time. From a less philosophical, more historical perspective, some have argued that Jainism was the religion of the Indus Valley civilization, the most ancient of the Indian civilizations, which was at its height from approximately 2600 to 1900 BCE. This is not a widely held view among scholars, given the lack of firm data that it is possible to know with certainty about the culture of this ancient civilization, due to the fact that we're not yet able to read its writing system, or even to know definitely what language it depicts. So everything we think we know about the Indus Valley tradition is highly speculative. But there's some things that are suggestive of connections with Jainism. According to Jain teaching, this tradition can be traced to a series of 24 beings that have lived in our region of the universe over the course of our current cosmic cycle, a period extending back many millions of years. The stories of the lives of these founding figures, or Tirthankaras, is difficult to correlate with historical scholarship, but a number of them are attested in independent, non-Jain sources from ancient India. By the way, this particular depiction is not of one of the Tirthankaras. This is Bahubali, who was the son of the first Tirthankara, but the statue is just amazing, and I had to incorporate it somewhere in my presentation. It's a beautiful monument in Karnataka, in southern India, shot of Bahubali. The Tirthankaras that are attested in non-Jain sources include the 24th and most recent, that is Mahavira, who likely lived in either the 5th or 6th century BC and was a contemporary of the Buddha. The 23rd, Parshvanath, mentioned in a number of non-Jain sources, and finally the 22nd, Naminath, mentioned and also Adinath or Rishabha, who both are mentioned in the Rig Veda, dated by most scholars in its current form at least to the period between 1500 and 1000 BCE. Whether the Vedic references are to these two Jain Tirthankaras who go by the same name is a matter of some conjecture, but it's a possibility. Certainly both Parshvanath and Mahavira were actual historical figures, and we may refer to Mahavira as the founder of the contemporary Jain tradition, though if we do so, we should bear in mind that the tradition with which he is associated is based on an even older tradition, possibly extending back to the foundation of Indian civilization. In other words, if you want to say for the sake of convenience that Mahavira is the founder, you may do so, but that's really not technically correct from a Jain perspective. He's the 24th in a long series of teachers, at least a few of whom we have independent evidence for. Mahavira, again, lived in either the 5th or 6th centuries BCE, and the span of his life overlaps that of the Buddha. Indeed, according to the scriptures of both traditions, Jainism and Buddhism, Mahavira and the Buddha were aware of one another, and there are many similarities between their teachings and also the teachings of both of these masters with those of the Hindu tradition. Mahavir, like Buddha, is not a family name, but a title. Just as Buddha means awakened, Mahavir means great hero, and refers to the heroic effort required in the Jain path to enlightenment. Mahavir is also known as Jinnah, or conqueror, a militaristic sounding image, but one that refers to the conquest of one's inner enemies, including the impulse toward violence. A Jaina, or Jain in contemporary Indian languages, is a follower of the Jinnah. Jainism, Buddhism, and the Hindu traditions of India all affirm that all living beings are far more than their physical bodies. We are spiritual beings dwelling in a physical form that has been shaped by choices we have made while dwelling in earlier physical forms. When our bodies die, our essential spiritual reality continues in another form. In the words of one of the Hindu scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from childhood to youth and then to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. The self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change." Becoming a self-realized soul is the aim of all three of these traditions, though the Buddhist tradition does not use the term self in relation to this process, seeing it as carrying a residuum of egotism, which is a quality that all these traditions aim to overcome. A self-realized soul is free from the cycle of death and rebirth, having learned the lessons that our experiences as embodied beings teach us. All of our choices, specifically those that are infused with ego-based desire, lead to inevitable results. The principle of cause and effect that governs this process is called karma, which can be translated as action or as work. One's karma, one can say, is the work that one has to do in one's lifetime, the work that one brings into one's lifetime from a previous existence, and that one will carry over into other lifetimes until one has become free from it. This freedom, or moksha, liberation from the cycle of rebirth, is the result of self-realization, or absorption in one's true nature, also known as nirvana. This is the ultimate aim of Jain, Buddhist, and Hindu spiritual practice. Each of these traditions can be seen as subtly different variations on this common theme, and as employing subtly different strategies for realizing this common end. In the Jain tradition, the living being is known as the jiva, which can be translated as soul, but which literally means living being or a life force. There are as many jivas as there are living things, a number that is virtually infinite. Each jiva possesses four qualities to an infinite degree, which are therefore known as the Ananta Chatushtaya, the four infinitudes. These are infinite knowledge, or jnana, infinite perception, darshana, infinite bliss, sukha, and infinite energy, or power, virya. As long as we're bound to the cycle of rebirth, though, we do not realize the infinite potential that these qualities reflect. This is because our jiva has been associated for countless lifetimes with ajiva, or non-living matter. Karma, according to Jainism, is a type of ajiva that adheres to the jiva as a result of the passions, or ragas, which we feel when we have an experience. Experiences are of three basic kinds: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. The ragas that tend to correspond to these are, respectively, attraction, aversion, and indifference. The keys to stopping fresh karma from entering one's jiva is to cultivate a state of samayika, or equanimity, whether one is experiencing something that is pleasant, painful, or neutral. Samayika is not the same as indifference. We feel indifferent to an experience because we don't feel that it affects us. Samayika is living in the recognition that the inherently pure, blissful nature of our fundamental self cannot be destroyed or disrupted, no matter what external circumstances we experience. It is being alike in pain and pleasure. This means that we do still experience pain and pleasure, but we do not allow them to overwhelm us. The distinction between equanimity and indifference is an important one. If we do not attend to this distinction, we may develop the false impression that we are to be indifferent to the suffering of others. But this is the opposite of what the Jain tradition teaches. An essential element in the cultivation of equanimity is the practice of ahimsa, or nonviolence, in thought, word, and deed. The feelings that can drive us to desire harm for others attract the most destructive karmas to the soul. They need to be conquered if one is to experience the true and lasting peace of nirvana. Ahimsa is the foundation of Jain ethics. The entire Jain way of life, right down to its strict vegetarian diet, is based on the ideal of ahimsa. Perfect ahimsa is impossible for householders, persons living lives that are fully engaged with society and that involve earning a material livelihood and raising a family. The practice of ahimsa to the highest degree humanly possible falls to ascetics, Jain munis and sadhus, monks and nuns. The image for which the Jain tradition is probably best known is of Jain ascetics gently sweeping the ground in front of them so as to avoid even accidentally treading on tiny organisms on the ground, and sometimes wearing a mupati or mouth shield to avoid ingesting them from the air. I should note here that not all Jain ascetics wear a mouth shield, and that even those who do so do not do so at all times. Also, there are some ritual occasions when householders also wear them. But this mouth shield, this mupati, is really a great symbol for the Jain philosophy of nonviolence, that the awareness that even in the act of breathing we could be doing harm, and that we need to be mindful of that. It may be counterintuitive to claim that a tradition that enjoins such a strict way of life, seeing a thoroughgoing practice of ahimsa as essential to the attainment of spiritual liberation, possesses a philosophy of infinite diversity that can aid in an acceptance of all worldviews. One might expect Jains to assert that all other traditions fall short of the true practice of nonviolence, and so fail as paths to a higher spiritual state. And indeed, there have been Jains throughout history that have made such statements. Jain reflection on the nature of the jiva, however, has led to precisely this philosophy, Anaikantavada, the Jain philosophy of relativity. How did this remarkable development occur? Historically speaking, the earliest instance of this philosophy can be found in the Jain agamas, or spiritual texts, in which are presented the Jain community's memory of the teaching of Mahavira himself. In one of these scriptural texts, Mahavira responds to a set of questions posed by a disciple on the nature of the cosmos and the soul. And quoting from a text called the Bhagavati Sutra, one of the Jain agamas, the Venerable Mahavira told the Bhikkhu Jamali thus: "The world is Jamali eternal. It did not cease to exist at any time. It was, it is, and it will be. It is constant, permanent, eternal, imperishable, indestructible, and always existent. The world is Jamali non-eternal, for it becomes progressive in time cycle after being regressive, and it becomes regressive after becoming progressive. The soul is Jamali eternal, for it did not cease to exist at any time. The soul is Jamali non-eternal, for it becomes animal after being a hellish creature, becomes a man after becoming an animal, and it becomes a god after being a man." Mahavira is here explaining that those who claim the cosmos is eternal and those who claim it is non-eternal are both correct from different points of view. According to the Jain worldview, there has always been a cosmos. It is in this sense eternal. It is not, however, static. It undergoes constant change, its character being vastly different during the various phases of the cosmic cycle, known as progressive or utsarpani and regressive or avasarpani. It is in this sense not literally the same universe from epoch to epoch. It has different characteristics at different times in its existence. In a similar vein, the individual soul or jiva is also eternal. It has always existed and it will always exist. It inhabits numerous forms, however, over the course of its journey to freedom. The same soul can be in one lifetime a human being, in another an animal, in another an entirely different kind of being altogether. These forms are not eternal. They perish and pass away to be replaced by another and another and another until liberation is achieved. The answers to the questions, is the cosmos eternal or non-eternal? And is the living being eternal or non-eternal? Depend upon whether the questioner has in mind the totality of the cosmos or its current state of affairs, or the jiva as such, or the type of body that it currently inhabits. Okay? Am I eternal or non-eternal? If I'm referring to the jiva, I have always been and I shall always be. Am I eternal or non-eternal? Well, I was born in 1969 and I'll die sometime, hopefully not very soon. But this will pass away. So what do I mean mean by I when I ask the question? Well, that will determine the nature of the answer. In this way, seemingly incompatible answers to these questions can both be seen to be true. There is that in all of us which is eternal, and that in all of us which will pass away forever. The two are not mutually exclusive. This approach to seemingly contrary answers to the same philosophical question became, in the hands of Jain intellectuals over the course of 2.5 millennia, it was developed into a complex system of logic, according to which the views of rival systems of thought could be reconciled into an integral synthesis. One of the main debates among the various schools of philosophy in ancient India was over whether the essential nature of reality could best be described in terms of the relations of impermanent moments of existence, or in terms of an eternal and unchanging reality on which the illusion of time and change is projected by the mind. Buddhist traditions tend to adhere to the first of these views. According to Buddhism, it is our attachment to entities that we falsely view as solid and permanent that is the primary cause of our suffering and of our bondage to the cycle of rebirth. Hindu traditions tend to adhere to the second view, holding that our true nature is infinite being, consciousness, and bliss, with no real differentiation, no division across time. It is our adherence to that which is impermanent and changing in this view that is the cause of our suffering and bondage. Jain thinkers, with their both-and view of the nature of the jiva as having a nature which is eternal and unchanging, but is also passing through various forms to which it is really and truly, and not only apparently, bound, asserted that the Buddhists and Hindus were both correct and both incorrect in the way that they describe reality. Buddhists, on the Jain understanding, rightly describe the ephemeral nature of the phenomena that the jiva experiences, and Hindu traditions such as Vedanta rightly describe the eternal nature of the jiva's inner essence. Each was false, inasmuch as it denied the truth of the other view. Reality, according to this Jain understanding, is complex. It possesses many sides or aspects, which is the literal meaning of anekanta in the term anekantavada, doctrine of many-sidedness, or teaching of the ultimate complexity of reality. An Indian story that is often used to describe this view is the famous parable of the blind man and the elephant. A story, interestingly, first told by the Buddha to one of his disciples, who was confused by the many views that he heard debated among the followers of different sects. The elephant has many parts: its legs, tail, ears, tusks, and so on. A blind man grasping one of these and taking it to be the whole elephant will argue with those who grasp other parts and describe the elephant in terms different from the first blind man's experience. In this parable, the arguing blind men are the world's religions, or even we could say all worldviews, religious and non-religious. Each religion or worldview can be compared to a conceptual matrix for grasping reality. We all view reality through the perspective, through the lens of the assumptions that we bring to it. And these come from our worldview, from our beliefs about the nature of things. A Christian has a positive experience and sees it as the grace of God. A Jain has a similar experience and sees the working of karma. A non-religious person has a similar experience and sees a lucky random chance. If we apply the Jain philosophy of relativity to these three seemingly incompatible views, we can see each as capturing a different part of the reality of the situation. Jain logic allows us to see differences not as conflicting, but as complementary. Anekantavada is a metaphysical, what philosophers call an ontological view. It is a view that is about the nature of reality. Essentially, reality can be viewed in these multidimensional ways. I've got some examples here I'd like to show you. Look at this picture of ocean waves. What is more real, the ocean or the waves? What do you think? I'm hearing both. I'm hearing ocean, I'm hearing waves, right? And you're all right? Because it's a complex phenomenon. It involves all of these facets, all of these aspects. Here we have a famous example of conceptual disagreement. You have the old Ptolemaic model of the universe, where Earth is at the center, and the planets and the sun orbit it. And then you have the Copernican revolution, where it was realized the sun is at the center and the planets are going around it. I read a very interesting thing by Stephen Hawking, whose authority in the area of physics, I think, is pretty well established, where he said, it's not that the Copernican model is more true or more correct than the Ptolemaic model. It's just that the mathematics you have to use to make the Ptolemaic model work is very, very complicated. Right? The math is easier this way. But you can take any point in infinite space and say, this is going to be the center, and then all the relative motion of everything else will be calculated in terms of it. You can use the Earth as the center if you want, but it's going to be a lot harder to launch a space shuttle or a rocket to Mars if you do that. But this model is more elegant, and so it's preferred. So when people say the sun rises and the sun sets, do we go around correcting them? No, really the Earth turned. You know? Maybe children, so you can teach them about astronomy and so on. But people talk that way because from a certain perspective, well, the sun's going up, the sun's going down. It's not wrong, it's a matter of one's location in the cosmos. Here's an example that I like to use also, because this becomes especially complicated when we talk about religion, because we're not just talking about beliefs, we're talking about people's way of life. And the assumption working here is that it's not only your perspective, but also where you are in your spiritual journey that's going to shape what type of path is appropriate. Why should you be a Jain or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian or a non-religious person? And the question is sometimes raised, how can these seemingly incompatible paths be said to share something in common? How can they all lead you in some way to some higher realization? And I use a metaphor. I've sort of randomly picked Pittsburgh as the symbol for spiritual realization. Right? Pittsburgh equals enlightenment in this metaphor. I have no special partiality for Pittsburgh. I just picked it kind of randomly. Now, if you live in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, where I come from, right about here, and if someone asks you, how do I get to Pittsburgh? You say, well, you go west. Right? You go west. You take the Turnpike, Highway 76, you go west. However, if you're starting out in Chicago and you say, how do I get to Pittsburgh? You should say, well, you go east, right? That's the quickest way to get to Pittsburgh. These sound contradictory. What is the true way to Pittsburgh? Is it east or west? Let's start religions and we can have a war about it, right? The followers of the Western path and the followers of the Eastern path. Well, if we insist that everyone has to follow the same path to Pittsburgh, the person in Chicago is going to be in a difficult position, because if they have to go west, they have to go all across the United States, across the Pacific Ocean, across Asia and Europe, across the Atlantic Ocean, through New Jersey, across most of Pennsylvania, and finally they'll end up in Pittsburgh. They have to circle the globe practically, right, to do that. So the idea of the metaphor is, just as there are many paths to Pittsburgh, depends on where you start. In the same way, when we're talking about religion, when we're talking about spirituality, everyone has a different perspective. Everyone has a different makeup based on their culture, their background, and if we follow the Jain worldview, based on their past lives, based on the choices they've made before. So, as I was saying, Anikantavada is a metaphysical claim about the nature of reality, but it has a corresponding doctrine called Nyayavada, the doctrine of perspectives. This is an extension of Anikantavada into the realm of what philosophers call epistemology, the study of knowledge. We know the nature of an entity based on which of its multitude of aspects we perceive. Each aspect corresponds to a point of view from which the entity may be approached. A worldview is a matrix for grasping reality, and grasps those aspects of reality for which it is designed. Each worldview is a gateway to insight about a particular piece of the totality of being. Let me give you another example. This is a topic of a lot of controversy in the United States. I'm not sure so much in Canada, but people will sometimes have debates about the evolution of life versus the creation story given in the Bible. And people will fight and fight and fight about this. If you take this point of view, you can say evolutionary biology is a lens that's appropriate to a certain perspective, that if you're looking at the physical evidence, if you're looking at the science, you can deduce this theory. The story of creation in the Bible is conveying a completely different idea. It's saying that life is sacred, that the world proceeds from the ultimate good. It's a value statement. The two don't have to be in conflict if you view them as different matrices for looking at the same reality. Corresponding to both Anikantavada and Nyayavada is a doctrine about how best to make assertions about reality on the basis of the pluralistic understanding of truth which these two doctrines provide. This doctrine is called Syadvada, the doctrine of conditional predication. Literally, Syadvada means the doctrine of Syat. Syat is a word which in Jain technical usage means in some sense or from a certain perspective, it is the case that so-and-so. Recall Mahavir's account of the eternality and non-eternality of the world and the soul. A claim about reality, such as its permanence or impermanence, its having one nature or another, are true or false depending upon which aspect of reality they describe. Some scholars have speculated that a possible source of Syadvada was not only this metaphysical discussion about reality, but that it came from the rules governing the speech of Jain monks and nuns. Because Jain monks are enjoined to practice nonviolence in thought, word, and deed. So, in speaking, even if you're saying something that is true, something that's based on the authentic Jain teaching, something that you validated through your experience, you still say, I see it this way. This is my perspective, in my opinion, in my experience. I don't know how many of you follow arguments on the internet about various topics. The internet is a hotbed of violent speech, in my opinion. So many conflicts can be avoided if people began their statement with, in my opinion, from my point of view, from my perspective. Right? Nobody can argue that. I can say, this is the case, and then someone can disagree and argue with me. But if I say, in my experience, this is the case, no one can argue with that because they don't know my experience. Right? So Syadvada allows us to be a little more gentle, a little more peaceful, but also more accurate, more precise, because we really are talking about reality from our experience, whatever we say. According to Syadvada, if you analyze any statement, it has 7 possible levels of truth, or truth values, as philosophers say. In one sense, a claim can be said to be true. From a certain perspective, from a certain point of view, take any given claim, it's carrying some amount of truth. However, from a different perspective, the same claim is also false. In another sense, a claim is both true and false. In another sense, still, the truth of a claim is indescribable. It can't be captured in language. This is what the Buddhists mean when they say something is neither true nor untrue. Right? It is not, nor is it not. It means it's something that can't be grasped in words. In another sense, a claim is true and its truth is indescribable. In another sense, it is false and its truth is indescribable. And in another sense, a claim is true and false and its truth is indescribable. These 7 statements exhaust the possible non-redundant truth values of a given claim. I mean, if you try to add any more onto these, they're redundant, they're repetitive. So 7 possible levels of truth that a statement can have. No more, no less. In contemporary philosophical and theological reflection on religious diversity, I'm shifting emphasis now. We're moving from Jainism to contemporary discussion among philosophers and theologians and the academic world. 4 main stances have been described, which tend to define the range of views that people tend to hold about the fact that there are worldviews that differ from their own. One of these is called exclusivism. Exclusive is the view that one's own view alone is true and all others are false, right? My way or the highway, as people say, right? One true religion, one true God, one true faith, right? Everything else is false, ours is the right one. This view has been widely rejected by many thinkers on the topic of diversity for a variety of reasons. I'm one of those thinkers. I could get into why I think this is not tenable. And one basic reason would be just the fact that we are all epistemically limited, right? There's no special privileged perspective. Even if you do believe in enlightenment or an enlightened being, the moment an enlightened being communicates to you in language, they're in that realm of relative truth, because we all understand language differently. We all interpret it differently. And of course, another reason that exclusivism is objectionable to many is because there's very often a direct connection between violence, actual physical violence, and this kind of stance. On this basis, wars have been launched, persecutions, and so on. So the next view, the attempt to improve upon that, is often called inclusivism. in which one sees one's own view as the best, the one encompassing the widest expanse of truth, but in which one values other views positively as holding some amount of truth. This view is seen by its critics as paternalistic, and not much of an improvement over exclusivism. But I would argue that there's a sense in which we're all inclusivists to some extent, if we take seriously what it means to hold a worldview. If you think something is true, you think it's true, and to the extent that something contradicts it, you don't accept that. And even people who want to be maximally pluralistic still think that being pluralistic is better than being non-pluralistic. So there's a sense in which we're all inclusivists. But there's a question of how one expresses this. There's a certain logic, again, to inclusivism. The view that's developed most recently in response to inclusivism is something called pluralism, which maintains that all worldviews are more or less equivalent in their ability to capture truth. People adhere to their beliefs for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with truth and everything to do with who they are, where they were born, the culture in which they were raised, and so on. In an image used by the philosopher John Hick, one of the most prominent advocates of this view, to be a pluralist is to participate in a Copernican revolution, to again use that sun image, where instead of seeing one's own view as the sun of truth around which other views orbit like planets, one rather recognizes that one's own view is a planet just like the others, orbiting the sun of truth, which we each perceive in our own way and from our own perspective. So this is kind of a relativizing of the truth claims of various worldviews. Finally, there is a stance which is hard to label or categorize. Theologian Paul F. Knitter calls it the acceptance model, which is critical of all of the above views, arguing that it's better to make no advanced judgments about the truth of particular views. We all start by assuming quite naturally that our own view is true. But even to understand the views of others, especially religious views emerging in cultures and periods of history radically different from one's own, much less making judgments about their truth value, requires incredible patience and long, hard work. According to this view, then, it's better simply to reserve judgment on this topic and pursue the effort of engaging in interreligious and cross-cultural dialogue. So what does the Jain philosophy of relativity contribute to this conversation? How can it promote empathy, again, across religious and cultural boundaries? If one were to adhere to some form of the Jain philosophy of relativity, approaching diverse worldviews in the way suggested by it, we would first of all be a little bit like inclusivists. That is, we would be working from a definite worldview. The Jain philosophy of relativity does not involve setting aside basic Jain beliefs. It operates from within those basic Jain beliefs. Much like the pluralists, we would also understand that, at least prior to achieving enlightenment, we're all like the blind man and the elephant. And as I said a moment ago, even if you become enlightened, even if you reach nirvana, the moment you try to convey your experience in words, you're back in the realm of relativity. We would also appreciate that our own perspective prior to nirvana is not final or complete. It is true, and we begin from that premise, but it's not the whole truth, right? We have to start with some working theory of reality, or we can't get through life very far, right? We assume certain things are true, whether we inherit them from a religious tradition or through scientific experimentation or our own thinking, but with the idea that there is more truth out there, right? We would also seek out the ways in which the worldviews of others might complement and enhance our own view, for this philosophy includes within itself a motivation for dialogue. If my view is incomplete, it can only approach completion, which is a never-ending process, through the act of listening to and learning from others. So it's like being one of the blind men and saying, well, I'm going to listen to the other blind men because we're all feeling this complicated thing called an elephant, and my part is just one small part. I want to learn from the others. In this way, this approach would also mirror that of those who have rejected exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism as two easy answers to questions that really require deep engagement across religious boundaries in order to be addressed in anything like an adequate manner. We would even be able to affirm that there's some truth, even in exclusivism, to the extent that certain worldviews might capture a particular piece or aspect of reality in a unique and powerful way of which others are not capable, at least as currently configured. What's being accepted here is not the exclusive part, but to the extent that what exclusivists are really trying to say is that our tradition is unique. Our tradition has a unique perspective. We can say there's an extent to which that's also the case, right? Otherwise there would not be this diversity. Finally, this approach to difference would help us to cultivate the kind of empathy that the world needs. It enables us to learn from and appreciate difference, while at the same time affirming not only what we share in common, but the idea of complementarity, that difference is not necessarily conflict, that difference can be logically compatible with what one believes. The other is not the same as me, but the other and I together form parts of a greater, internally complex, organic reality to which we are both integral, like the organs in a body. One last question remains. If this approach is rooted, as I have said it is, in a Jain worldview, is it possible to adopt it without adopting the whole worldview? Should everyone just become a Jain? I personally think that would be fine, but does this not then amount to a kind of Jain exclusivism, or at best inclusivism? My view is that something similar to the Jain philosophy of relativity, an analog to it, can be cultivated from within many different worldviews. And in fact, if you look into the various Indian traditions, if you look into Christian theology, these are the traditions I know best, there are variations of these themes that can be justified from within several different starting points. The specific form it takes varies, of course, with each worldview. I see no reason, though, why the basic contours of the Jain approach might not be replicated in many traditions, religious and secular. Indeed, as I just said, this has already occurred, to the extent that practitioners in a wide array of traditions already speak in pluralistic ways, with an openness to learning from the other and to affirming certain commonalities, while also recognizing and appreciating difference. What Jainism lends to this conversation, in my opinion, is a particular precision and a powerful logic which demonstrates that pluralism need not simply be a platitude, sort of a nice politically correct sentiment, but can in fact be a major contributor to understanding reality, to understanding the nature of being by drawing together many diverse views into an organic, integral whole. And of course, this would be an ongoing process, each integrating the best of the others into itself, and perhaps one day converging in a shared but multifaceted vision of truth. Thank you very much. This mic is there, so you can make yourselves heard. Or maybe I've solved everything.
You ended your wonderful lecture with a statement on truth. And I would like you to explain what you mean by truth, because does that imply that all of us are speaking falsehood most of the time, that we are always to seek the truth? So what is the meaning of truth?
What's the meaning? Okay, not a very hard question, right? What's the meaning of truth? This is a very profound question. And of course, in philosophy, both Western and Indian, there are many concepts of what truth means. I am using sort of a common speech idea of what philosophers often call a correspondence theory of truth. That truth is simply that which is also the traditional Indian understanding, that there is sat, there is being, there is reality. We're all situated within that, and within that reality, we each have our own limited perception of it. And so the argument here that I'm basically presenting is there is a way things are. There is a reality. Any statement about that we make that is trying to describe it is an attempt to capture truth. But those attempts are, on the one hand, always incomplete. So in that sense, we are always speaking falsehood. But they also are not completely false. The truth is not opaque. So according to the Jain understanding, our statements are partially true, partially false, and then those other five, right? Both and, indescribable, etc. So that we're telling the truth and we're speaking falsehood at the same time, because that's a function of our limited perspective. To the extent that our perspective excludes others, it's limited, it's therefore not the whole truth, but they're capturing something. And so there's partial truth.
May I ask another question? A follow-up, please. Jainism is a very old religion, at least 2,500 years old this time. Probably older. And we have been seeking truth all this time. Are we any closer?
Well, I guess it depends on, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, the mic is kind of coming and going. I guess our perception of truth is kind of like the mic, right? Sometimes we've got it, and then sometimes we're off. If you say, have people found a higher realization in the practice of Jainism? I think many people have. If you go to Shravanabagola in Karnataka, there's that wonderful statue of Bahubali. There are places in the hillside where footprints have been carved. And there's writing in the old Brahmi script, and then in a more recent script that eventually evolved into the script in Karnataka. And it gives the names and the dates of when particular munis achieved realization, achieved Kevalyan, as it's called in Jainism, on that particular spot. And it's very inspirational. I mean, we walk around and we see all of these footprints. So this Muni became enlightened here, this Muni became enlightened here. And if that's true, right, if they were telling the truth about their experience, then many people have reached a higher truth through Jainism. But at the same time, it's like the map of going to Pittsburgh, where we're all starting from different places. So a lot of people still have quite a distance to go before they reach that ultimate aim. So we would say collectively, we're probably no closer and no further away. We're as a human species just kind of passing through this world looking for that higher truth. But the trajectory of the individual jiva, individual soul, it seems to me, I mean, if you believe in this tradition, you would have to say that yes, that there are people who've achieved that realization through this. Otherwise, the tradition would not have appeared in the first place. Right? The idea is that Mahavir achieved this aim, that he gathered followers who accepted, who believed that he had achieved that. They achieved it too, following his teaching. And so they spread it, they perpetuated it. I think the same is true of other traditions as well. I wouldn't be a Jain exclusivist. But I would say on the individual level, yes, people have reached it. But collectively, no. And this is something that people like myself coming from a Western background sometimes have a hard time wrapping our heads around. But the Indian traditions aren't really about the world getting better. The world is just the world. It's always existed, it will always exist, it will go through various cycles. But we can reach higher levels of realization. So the world will keep on doing what it does, because that's its purpose. But the individual souls may, hopefully, and that's the ideal, evolve out and reach a higher state. Good questions. Other questions? Yes?
How would you reconcile the notion of truth with present-day concepts of quantum physics or the Einsteinian relativity? Because to quantum physics, you can think of a wave-particle duality.
Yes.
And how would Jainism sort of interpret this? Because both can be correct.
Right. Oh, it's fantastic. And I always am a little bit cautious about this because I'm not a physicist. I did take an honors physics course in college, and then I never took another physics course again. I'm not mathematically inclined, but what I've understood from the popular representations I've seen about quantum theory, and read people like Stephen Hawking and so forth, that there are some very interesting correspondences between aspects of quantum theory and several of the systems of Indian philosophy, including Jainism. And you named the perfect example, or the particle wave duality, the fact that there are frames of reference where it's valid to speak of a particle as a particle, and in effect it becomes such through our perceiving it that way. And then you can use another frame of reference and the same particle is a wave, and that is as valid. And that's very much in the same line of thinking to what Jainism what Amikantavad is talking about, as I understand it. And I find that extremely interesting because obviously they weren't doing this kind of physics in ancient India. But the theory, at least among many people within these traditions, is that it's possible through refining the mind, through yogic practice, to intuitively grasp some of these things. And then they're, of course, presented in the idiom of the philosophy and the culture of the time. But it's really a remarkable correspondence, I think, in terms of quantum theory and Jain philosophy. Not identical in every respect necessarily. We're talking about both ways of thinking are very complex, but there are very interesting points of convergence, and that's definitely one of them. Yes?
You mentioned that the Jain view of cosmology is that the universe will continue forever. Now, is that in conflict with the Hindu view of the cyclic universe?
No, it's very similar, actually. In the Hindu view, you have the universe, also goes through cycles. It emerges, and in its first stage, there's an abundance of energy, there's an abundance of good, you could say, and everything in the cosmos goes very smoothly, and then things gradually decline. So you go through the yugas, the Sat Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, then finally Kali Yuga, which is the worst. And then the whole thing starts over again, back to the Sat Yuga. The Jain view is different only in the following sense, that rather than just getting progressively better, or rather than just declining and then suddenly being better again and then declining again like that, there's also an equally long ascending stage called the Utsartani. So there's a phase of decline and a phase of improvement. In the Hindu model, it's basically just decline, and then it stops, and then it starts again and declines. There's not that corresponding ascending period. That time period in the Hindu tradition is the night of Brahma, when there's just nothing happening in the universe. And then it reemerges back at the Satyuga stage. So there's a slight difference between the two. But the basic idea of an eternal universe going through a series of very, very long cycles is common between the two.
Is there a different Jain view of time? Like in Hinduism, time, there are at least 2 or 3 different interpretations of time. Like in heavens, there is no time.
Right.
Is that also Jain view, or is it a different one?
The Jain view is, like you said, there are different Hindu views. So in Advaita Vedanta, for example, time is not even real. It's something that we are projecting onto reality. But there are other Hindu views. There are schools of thought called Nyaya, Vaisheshika. These are what we call realist schools. They say time is real. The universe is essentially as we perceive it. And Jainism is much closer to those views. Jainism is a realist tradition. And this is important, religiously speaking, because remember, from a Jain perspective, karma actually adheres to the soul, the jiva. And it needs to be removed through action and through Jain practice. Whereas in Advaita Vedanta, these things only appear to do so. And that appearance needs to be broken. One needs to change one's perception. And so that difference is significant. In the debates among these various schools of thought in the classical period, in response to both Advaita and Buddhist views that time was not real and that it was just a matter of perception, the Jain argument was that such a view would undermine practice. That if you thought that, well, it was just an illusion, it was not real, then you would not take seriously ahimsa and the various other things that a Jain needs to do. So they have a very realist interpretation. Karma is real, the soul is real, and they are really bound and related and need to be unbound. And that's part of one of the reasons for the very strict practice in Jainism. Whereas in both Advaita Vedanta and also Mahayana Buddhism, you have the idea it's really in your mind and the change needs to happen in your mind. Now, those views aren't radically opposed because Buddhists and Vedantins would also say, well, you need to practice in order to achieve that realization. And Jains would also say you also need to transform your consciousness. So they're not completely at odds, but the emphasis is definitely different. So from the Jain point of view, time is real, and it unfolds as we perceive it.
That you may be interested to know that currently in theoretical physics and in cosmology, there is an ongoing debate on the reality of time, and they are not agreed. The one side, there is one school that says time is real, and another school that says time does not exist. So,
and those arguments map very interestingly onto the Indian debates among the different darshan, the different perspectives.
yeah.
It's the same argument going on in different terms. Any other questions? Yes? I always worry when there are no questions. I'm afraid that it might mean I was utterly confusing. So,
You referenced John Hick,
yes.
and as I understand it, he met with a lot of resistance as he wrote about pluralism. And you've outlined the theory very well on pluralism, both as an objective and as a means to accomplishment. But in practical terms, do you see any evidence of movement towards pluralism at all? And where would it be?
I see it, this is one of the wonderful things about being a professor is you keep getting older, but the young people that you're working with are always from 18 to 22. And I've seen a shift in my students. I've been teaching now at Elizabethtown College for 16 years, and before that I taught for 3 years part-time in various places in Chicago. So I've been teaching, I can't believe it, almost 19 years, I guess. I've seen a shift in the attitudes of many of my students toward pluralism being either rejected or entertained as an interesting possibility, to being assumed that that's the case. That, of course, many religions lead to the same goal or similar goals or compatible goals. Of course, we should accept everyone. And there was a very interesting article in Newsweek, it's 6 years old now, but in 2009, and there was an author named Lisa Miller, and she wrote this, I don't think she's very aware of Jainism, she wrote this article called We're All Hindus Now. And the basic premise of the article was that religious attitudes in the United States in the last century have shifted dramatically away from what used to be the case in terms of how other religions are viewed, and toward a much more positive view. 65% of people surveyed in a Pew Research poll said they accepted the idea that the way it was phrased is many religions can lead to eternal life. 65%, that's almost 2/3. So the idea that there's only one true religion, everyone else is going to hell, is really out of fashion. I find most of my students don't embrace that idea. In the same poll, they said that 20% of the population accepted the idea of reincarnation or rebirth, and that's remarkable when you think 1 in 4 people. I don't know if figures would be similar in Canada, but I know in the US, those are the kinds of statistics that have come up. So I think there's a gradual, you could almost call it infiltration of some of these Indian concepts into the wider consciousness. I think a lot of times people don't know where it comes from. They're not receiving it directly from a Jain Muni or Hindu Swami or a Buddhist teacher. Sometimes they are. But very often it sort of percolates through the larger culture. John Hick was very influenced by these ideas. His pluralistic hypothesis has a lot of resonances with teaching of Swami Vivekananda. Some differences as well, but he's definitely gotten some inspiration from India there. But then his ideas, will spread through his students, through their teaching and writing, and all these things gradually find their way into the larger culture. And of course, another avenue, and one of the most powerfully transformative media, I think, for transforming culture is popular culture. And one of the things I've been exploring in some of my work recently is how film series like Star Wars, the popular music, especially the Beatles in the 1960s, George Harrison, all these things became avenues through which some of these concepts have seeped into the larger culture. And so I see it happen. I think it's a gradual change. And it's a change that's happening on a level that many people they're not even conscious that there is a change. They're simply following what seems natural to them. That's my initial response. You could write a whole book in response to that. Thank you for the question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
And do you see anything in the Vietnam War or even in the way for Mahatma Gandhi's struggle for independence to a non-violent way? A close connection to some of these ideas?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, Mahatma Gandhi was very inspired by Jainism. He grew up in Gujarat, of course, in a region where there are many Jains. His mother was a devout Vaishnava Hindu, but her guru was a Jain monk. And before he went to London to study law, he took some vows in the presence of the monk that he would follow good behavior while he was outside of India. And he also was very close to Rajchandra Mehta, who was a Jain layperson, but very influential Jain thinker at his time. Some people call him Gandhi's guru. And then there's another piece of evidence in some of Gandhi's correspondence. He had a journal called Young India. And there was a letter to the editor, letter to him, where someone pointed out that there seemed to be contradictions in Gandhi's own thought process, because sometimes it sounded like he followed Advaita Vedanta, and sometimes he sounded very theistic, more in the Bhakti vein of Hinduism. And so the writer of the letter said, well, which is it? Do you follow Advaita Vedanta, or do you believe in the dualistic worldview? And Gandhi said, I follow both because I believe in Anekantavada and Syadvada. And then he talked about Jainism. And he said this was a view that allowed him to see others, see himself through the eyes of others. And he said it made him more tolerant of other shortcomings, because he could see that he had the same shortcomings if he viewed himself from their perspective, which was a little different from what classical Jain philosophy is teaching, but it's what he gained from it. And he says, my Anekantavada is not that of the learned, it's a practical Anekantavada. But he was very aware of these ideas, definitely. And then again, it's like I was saying with the last gentleman's question. Through Gandhi, these things then percolate to other parts of the world. Martin Luther King picks up Gandhi's influence, and we feel that in the American Civil Rights Movement, and there are reverberations of that today. So you have an indirect line of connection going straight back to Jain philosophy there. Okay. Questions or what's next? Oh, maybe with another question. Yeah.
Hey, so I just had a quick question about one of the slides you pulled up, where there was a specific sect, I think, of Jainism, where those nuns would cover their mouth to prevent themselves from ingesting microbial life.
Yes.
I was just curious as to I'm curious as to what they would eat, like if there's any other life forms that it's acceptable to eat, I guess.
Right. The Jain diet, if you follow it strictly, it involves very, very close adherence to principles of ahimsa. So, of course, no animal product is involved at all, except for milk, traditionally. Milk is part of the Jain diet in India because that doesn't involve any harm to the animal. Though there is now a growing vegan movement among Jains that has been sparked by modern milk extraction methods, which seem to be cruel and to cause harm to the animals. So there are Jains moving away even from milk. So it's strict vegetarianism, but then even within the vegetable world, there are some types of vegetable that involve killing the whole plant, pulling it by the root. So there's certain vegetables which you would also not use. And there's certain types of plants that are believed to have large numbers of microorganisms living in them, and so they're not eaten. So it's a pretty strict diet. Now, that being said, I want to mention my first experience at the Jain temple, because I had only read about the Jain diet and not really experienced it at that point. And I went to a Jain temple in New Jersey, actually, the Cherry Hill Jain temple across the river from Philadelphia. And the food was just amazing. I was pretty full. There are a lot of interesting things you can do with food, and I think one of the things, I think Jainism is sort of refined this to a very advanced level, but even if you look more broadly at just Indian cuisine, very often in the Western world, if we think of vegetarianism, we're just thinking of people eating boiled vegetables, and it doesn't sound very palatable. But that's not the case in India. I mean, there have been all kinds of very interesting ways of making the vegetarian food very, very appealing, and that's definitely the case.
I guess, I'm sorry for asking like a very shallow surface level question, but just what differentiates these microscopic life forms in need of being protected from ingestion, as opposed to living cells that occur in plants or any other acceptable to eat?
Right, okay, yeah, very good. There is a criterion in the Jain tradition, and this goes back to very, very old texts that categorize living things in terms of the number of sensory organs they have. So you have 5-sensed beings, 4-sensed beings, 3-sensed, 2-sensed, 1-sensed. The more sensory organs a being has, the more capable it is of feeling pain. So a very modern way of putting this is you want to eat low on the food chain. You want to eat things with... being physically alive involves a certain inevitable amount of violence, and this is something the Jain tradition acknowledges. And in fact, there are penances which the monks and nuns perform for even that little amount of harm that they have to do just to eat and stay alive and move about. And but what differentiates what you can eat and what you cannot is the number of sense organs in the living thing. Does it feel pain? And there's extensive debate and discussion about this internally to the Jain community. And certain consensus has emerged over time of what foods are acceptable and what are not. But that's right. One important thing I think to point out about the Jain rules, it's a very strict path, a very strict way of life, but we should not be confused by some of our Western assumptions about religion when we're thinking about what it's like to be a Jain, because it's not that there is an angry God watching you who's going to punish you if you eat the wrong thing. It's not like that. The universe operates according to this very impersonal law of karma, and it's simply understood that if you do a certain amount of harm, that's going to come back to you. If you do a certain amount of good, that's going to come back to you. So it's not like an angry God watching over you, it's more like gravity. People take it seriously who are practicing, that want to advance on the spiritual path. But there's really a lot of freedom and a lot of latitude. I've seen Jains practice, of course this is true of all religions. You have people who practice very, very seriously and people who are a little more relaxed. But there's no centralized institution, no central Jain church saying you're a good Jain and you're a bad Jain. It's up to everyone individually to practice it as they understand it, as they see fit. Because it's just the way the universe is from a Jain understanding. It's not a theistic tradition in the Western sense. All right. Okay.
Can you hear me? I'm pretty loud. I may be violating one of the 7 levels of truth and saying that I'm speaking from more than my own perspective for a brilliant and stimulating talk. Thank you very much, Dr. Jeffrey Wall. It's my pleasure to call on Raj Jain, our benefactress this evening, and Megan Blight, Executive Director of University Advancement, to come to the stage, please.
and the entire current team who is involved in arranging the lecture and bringing it to the relevant classes of the US as well. I would also like to thank the audience, without whom the lecture would have not been anything. Chandran, my husband, loved the people around him and was always trying to find ways to help the community and the friends. He also made efforts for philosophical understanding through groups for adults and youth. I I'm so happy to see you all here. It seems to me that I'm reaping the fruits of his karmas. Thank you all for coming. Now there are refreshments, so if you would like to enjoy that, and we'll talk together. Yes. Okay, thank you.
Você é